Parshat Re'eh, we are in the fourth book of Devarim, the fourth book in the book of Deuteronomy. Now, the title of the sermon was the final sermon or the final homily. Starting with the first parasha, Devarim, it's a series of sermons or drashot that Moses is giving to the people Israel. Again, it's these final charge that Moses wants to share with the people Israel because he knows that this is going to be the last stage for him. And after much despair and trying to reverse his punishment, that's when he kicked the waters of Meribah and gave credit to himself and not to God. His punishment is he's not allowed to enter into Eretz Israel. So, in a way, I want us to think that when we're dropping off our kid at college or there's some type of transition, maybe it's your kids getting a driver's license and they're going off on the road for the first time. So as a parent, this is when we get to stick our finger in their face saying, you better do this or X is going to happen to you. And that is what Moses is trying to convey to the people Israel. It's not surprising that in this second parashah of Et Hanan, we get the Shema, that the foundational doctrinal belief of the Jewish religion. But the most important thing in these series of homilies when we examine them is Moses is trying to prepare them not only for life without Moses, but how to be successful and thrive in Eretz Yisrael, in the land of Israel. And often in the book of Deuteronomy, Israel is referred to Eretz Yisrael, which is the mystical, the spiritual connection to our indigenous homeland. And in these parshiot of these homilies, we have reminders of these precepts, what to do, and these proscripts as to what not to do. Because for Moses, the heart of Jewish life that Joshua will lead them is what they will do Jewishly and as a society once again in the land of Israel. It's here in these final homilies that we learn that Eretz Yisrael is everything. It's the culmination of the promise that God gave to Abraham earlier ago in the Torah. But here is where we get into that more mystical connection. So we have the teaching to observe the Shalosh Reglaim, the three pilgrimage festivals. Here's from Rabbi Hirsch, the great founder of modern Orthodox Judaism, that says, in the book of Deuteronomy, it's devoted to the commandments and teachings that were relevant to the establishment of the new society in the land. Three festivals, Sukkot especially, are mentioned because of the role in the agricultural society of the year. And the other teaching that is significant, according to Nachmanides, is that it's Jerusalem. It's that during these time of the year we make our pilgrimage to the temple. Again, it's what we will do as Jews, not wandering in the wilderness, not in the diaspora, but once again in Eretz Yisrael. And therefore we learn that so much of our Jewish praxis, so much of our Jewish ritual is focused in a tangible land. Scholarship calls this biblical Zionism, but whatever we call it, it's that Judaism at its best thrives when it returns to the land in which it was created. It's the early origins of Zionism. It's so important even in the Reformed tradition. And this Parshat Re'eh, teaches us that Eretz Yisrael is for Am Yisrael. Yes, later in the book of Joshua, we learn about the allocations and the tribes. But what's so important about the tangibility of the land for today, it speaks nothing about Reform or conservative, Orthodox, modern Orthodox. It's for all the Jewish people. And part of my endeavor regarding Israel advocacy is the true definition of Am Yisrael, one united Birmingham. And I think that begins especially with our love of Israel. But just like Moses needed to remind the Israelites before they entered the land, because he knew they didn't get it. And that was foreshadowing of what it was for the Jewish people today. And after all, this is the essence of the high holidays. And when we look at the high holiday liturgy, we admit that we are stiff-necked and stubborn. Moreover, when we do our Yom Kippur Vidui, the confession, we confess that we too easily forget Zion. It's written in our high holiday prayer book, Mishkan HaNefesh. Moses' final sermon to Israel is something that we need for us today. It's the constant reminder of what is going on in our peoplehood, and I know I've been talking about this often, but as I said a couple weeks ago and in May and June, I am obligated to embody Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, when we need to know what's going on in Israel, because we are all responsible for Israel. For those who have not been following the news, Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon, they fired 19 rockets into Israel, this time in the northern border. Hezbollah is in Lebanon. Only 10 Iron Dome rockets intercepted the missiles from Hezbollah. And for those who don't know what's going on in Lebanon, it's utterly the Wild West from a couple hundred years ago. Their economy has totally crashed. The military has given up. They're rationing from gasoline to food. So they're on the verge of a major civil war. On top of that, it's the year anniversary of that awful explosion caused again by Hezbollah. So this is what Israel is facing. But on top of that, a couple days ago, Iran elected their new right-wing president, Ibrahim Raisi, and before he became the elected president of Iran, he was known to sit on a panel that oversaw hundreds of executions of political prisoners. But the most appalling thing about this is that the EU second-in-command, Enrique Mora, was there at the celebration as he was inaugurated. And this is the stuff that we need to be reminded of, because there's going to be a lot more politicking regarding the future of the Iranian deal, and I know so many of my colleagues a couple of years ago spoke out against this, but this is actually the first time that Iran has three major figures that lead the country that are all right-wingers that are trying to eviscerate the state of Israel. And according to sources, they are very close from finally having enriched a nuclear weapon. Again, Moses' reminder to the people Israel is that we have to guard and protect her. Moreover, as I am obligated, our Congresswoman from Michigan, my home state, Rashida Tlaib, continues her Jew hatred, speaking at a convention of socialistic Democrats. She said that the people working behind the curtain, again, the people working behind the curtain are controlling the world. And to whom do you think she's talking about? Yes, the Jews, okay? And once again, there's been nothing from the White House or any form of significant coverage, but here she goes on television saying that Jews are controlling the world. Major Jewish organizations have once again spoke out against her. And what I'm telling you to do for tonight is I'm leaving messages once a week with the Speaker of the House, begging her to remove her from her committee assignments, just like they did to Steve King and Marjorie Taylor Greene, that she has got to be removed because she said another blood libel, and blood libel, again, is the lie that Jews were kidnapping Christian babies and taking their blood for the Passover ritual of matzah. And here's what she said, that I will always tell people cutting people off from water is violence from Gaza to Detroit, and Israel in no capacity is cutting off water to Gaza. They are the ones who give them electricity, and during the war in Gaza in May, Israel kept their electricity on. It was Hamas who was actually trying to shoot those down to blame Israel for it. And finally, the Congresswoman from St. Louis, Cori Bush, I'm not talking about her positions regarding the police. She is comparing poverty and economic despair on the world's only Jewish state. Again, our response is to call the Speaker of the House and to ask her to remove these people from committee assignments. I know there's some who believe that these people are so minor in the realm of Congress, but they get so much coverage from day in to day out. And the more they allow this to go unchecked, the more that this becomes mainstream. And so once again, for us to listen to Moses' sermon is for us not only to be aware about these things that are going on, but to speak about them, to advocate about them. And the scariest thing that I mentioned is really Iran. And I know that my colleagues will be addressing a lot of this during their high holiday sermons. Tomorrow, Benji Sokol is going to be giving an incredible Devar Torah about Parshat Re'eh, about the definition of kosher, which in its basic definition means a fitting people. And he's going to get into a great drash about that. But the reason why we keep kosher, we are a fitting people, is one reason. That is that God asks us to be a holy nation. Jewish peoplehood is best when we are united on something. We may have theological differences or ritual differences compared to our friends down the street, our friends on Overton Road, but at the end of the day, we're unified by three things: God, Torah, and Eretz Yisrael. It's our obligation as a Jewish Birmingham to meet in that center, because when we are in this together regarding our love of Israel, this is how we make change, and this is how we bring awareness. I promise this congregational family I'd always be loud. I will not stop talking about it, nor will I ever apologize for it. But sometimes we have to be reminded. Moses knew this before the people entered into Eretz Yisrael, and it's our job to remind our people to ensure that she continues to thrive on. Shabbat Shalom.